Fason, Sangele, Zoyaha, Uchiha, Muskogee, Shadane, Adene. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this marvelous MONAH Fall Festival. And I have the great pleasure of introducing you all to the marvelous Johnnie Jae. She is incredible. If most of you geeks out there already know who Johnnie is, because she is the head woman of the tribe of geeks in the United States, that great Indigenous Geek Nation. And but you know, geeks care about the mother too, and take care of our mother. And she's going to talk with you all, and I hope you're going to have questions. Take notes, okay? There will be a quiz afterwards. No, not really. But please welcome Johnnie Jae as she talks about the healing powers of Mother Earth. Johnnie?
Hey. Hey, everyone. Well, as he mentioned, I'm Johnnie Jae, and I'm the founder of A Tribe Called Geek.com, where we bring indigeneity to the geeks at the powwow. And I also do quite a few other things. I'm the founder, one of the co-founders of Not Your Mascots and Live Indigenous OK. And I'm also one of the co-founding members of the Fan Organizer Coalition, where we really get geeky with it because we like to organize around our favorite fandoms. So, for example, we organized all the fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender to raise awareness about Line 3. And we watched The Painted Lady, and we were able to talk about how what's going on in Avatar: The Last Airbender is very close to what's happening with Line 3 and what happens when your water is polluted and how that impacts the communities around that water source. So, you know, I love to get geeky with it. So what I'm here today is we're talking about the healing powers of creation. When we think about healing and trauma, you know, we don't always think about what healing entails or how we heal. And sometimes we don't even have the words to express what it is we're feeling, what it is we're going through, or how to express what it is we need. And so for me, you know, one of the reasons that I started talking about this is because last year I lost my mom. And it was really hard. We lost her to COVID. And our experience was very different because a lot of people didn't get the chance to say goodbye to their loved ones. You know, their loved ones were in the hospital alone. But for us, when my mom got sick, we fought to be in the hospital with her. And so we were there with her for a month while she fought COVID. And when she eventually died. And we got to be with her every step of the way. And I really appreciate that opportunity because it is so precious. You know, because our mom was there with us for our first breath. And we all got to be there for her last. And it's been really hard, like even now. You know, like I was like determined not to cry. There's no crying at conferences, but you know, I need Tom Hanks to come shake me up real quick. But you know, it's really hard for me to talk about my mom because that trauma is still there. And, you know, and for somebody who, like me, like I'm a talker, I speak, I'm a writer. So when I feel things, I write it. But with my mom, you know, I'm still dealing with that trauma. And I found that words are not enough. Like it's too powerful. It's too raw. It makes it too real. So I couldn't find the words to speak. So I stopped speaking for a long time. And then I couldn't write because, again, you know, words have power and it makes it real. It makes it final. And so, like, there are things, like with my mom's experience that I haven't talked about yet that I'm not ready to share. But it's also part of healing, so I know eventually I'm going to have to. But I struggle with grief. Even before the pandemic, you know, I was in therapy trying to learn how to handle grief better because as Native people, we are always grieving in one way or another, whether it's the loss of our culture, our identity, the loss of our resources, our land, the troubles that we face in our communities. Like, we are always grieving loss in some way. And in our communities, we're taught that grief is sacred. It's a sacred time. You know, people say that when we're grieving, like, our prayers are more powerful. And, you know, that's why they ask us, you know, for families who are grieving, you know, to not participate in certain ceremonies, to not, you know, take part in different social activities for a year, you know, while we mourn, because we are very close to the other side as we're saying goodbye to our loved ones. And there's a lot of ceremony, you know, that helps us grieve and helps us mourn, helps us come to terms, and there's a lot of community care. But with COVID, all of that was disrupted. You know, we didn't necessarily have the chance to say goodbye the way that we are supposed to, or to even have that community care afterwards. Now, with my mom, it was very different. My mom, her funeral was the first traditional funeral that my tribe was able to have after COVID. And it was really difficult because we're trying to, you know, at the same time be safe and keep the community safe, but yet trying to uphold our traditions. And, you know, and it was really difficult for a lot of people to understand because we had just experienced something so traumatic with my mom, you know, where a lot of people lost their loved ones and they didn't have to see it. Like, they didn't have to see the toll that it takes on a person's body, or actually like what being ventilated means, and what that entails and how hard that is on the body, and how hard it is on the healthcare workers who are taking care of them, you know. And, you know, we were there for all of that, and it gave us a very different perspective, and we had to be more careful. And so it was hard for us to kind of, you know, follow tradition, but at the same time try and be safe, because so much of what we do as Native people is community. And it was really difficult. But in the year following, because we weren't able to really have that like community care that we're supposed to have, you know, our family really struggled with grief, and we're still coming to terms with it. You know, my mom, she died April 1st. Actually, this is a joke we've had with my mom. She died April 2nd, but for some reason, we think she died on April Fool's. Because, you know, and part of that is like coping mechanism, I think, because it was on the 1st when we found out that my mom wasn't going to make it. And we kind of thought, oh, they're joking with us, you know, because as Natives, we do inappropriate humor all the time. So, you know, we kind of played it off like we were trying to be humorous about it. And, you know, and then by mid-morning, you know, it hit us like, oh no, like this is real. But even now, like when we talk about my mom, like even my sister, she made my mom's gravestone, and we are laughing because it went through so many eyes to make sure all the information was right. And it still says April 1st. And, you know, and it's not just that, you know, we laugh because my mom, she was one of those people where if something could go wrong, it was going to go wrong. And, you know, and she liked to joke around with us. So even when I was doing her memorial shirt, she was born in 1963. And I know this is going to sound a little inappropriate and perverted, but for some reason, the number 69 kept popping up. And it's actually on the shirt. And again, this is something that went through so many eyes and nobody caught it. But we were laughing because my mom had inappropriate humor. And we were like, there she is. You know, she's like letting us know it's okay. Like, she's okay. But, you know, we still struggle with that grief. Like, how do we deal with this? My mom, and I think it's the same for a lot of people, you know, your parents are kind of the center of your universe in ways you don't even realize until they're gone. And so we've really struggled with that. And, you know, and I struggle really, really bad with grief. And so, like, I've been trying to figure out, like, how do we come to terms with this? Like, how do we make grief okay? Like, how do we get through this without it changing the core of who we are? Because sometimes, you know, we have different responses to trauma. You know, some people, it makes them more compassionate, more empathetic. But then there are other people who become more guarded. They start putting up walls. They become more hardened. You know, they get angry and they act out. And sometimes we don't always know. Like, it's that trauma response that's going on. Like, we don't know why we're doing the things we're doing or saying the things we're saying. Like, we just kind of feel a little bit lost. And that's kind of what was happening with me. And, you know, I do a bunch of geeky stuff. I'm a writer. I'm a talker. You know, that's what I do. And I doodle. And I always thought of my doodles as doodles, you know. But my mom, she was an artist. My brother is an artist. Incredible, you know, like when they're drawing or when they're creating, you know, they were creating incredible things. And so I never considered myself an artist because, you know, I've done graphic design as well. But I never considered that art because I always felt like it wasn't me that was coming through. It was always me bringing somebody else's vision into fruition. So I never felt like it was my art. I never felt like it was a part of me. But after my mom died, you know, I started trying to find ways like, how do I cope? How do I express myself? Because I can't talk anymore. I can't write. You know, it's too real. So what do I do? Like, how do I handle this in a way that is healthy? And that's something that I really have to think about because the reason that I struggle with grief so much and depression is because I am a suicide survivor. And so, like, I have to be very mindful of how I go into grief, how I go into different emotions. You know, I have to be mindful of the impact that that's going to have on me and be just super aware of where I'm at mentally in order to keep myself safe. And so, you know, I really had to think about, like, what do I do now? You know, I can't talk about this. I can't write about it. So what do I do? And I started really thinking about the big picture as well. Like, there's so many things that we don't do, like out of fear or, you know, out of insecurity. Like, we think we're not enough. And we always think that there's more time down the road. Like, oh, well, you know, maybe not now, but I'll do it later. You know, like, I still have time. I'm young. There's a whole, you know, decades ahead of me. But that's not always true. Like, you don't know how much time that you have left. And when my mom died, you know, it really kind of stuck that in my head. Like, you know, if my mom's gone, you know, like, what's that mean for me? Like, how much time do I have left? Or how much time do we all have left? And, you know, and I started thinking about other issues too, because we talk about climate change. So then it starts thinking about, like, well, how much time do we have as a human species, you know? And, like, what if a meteor comes and it crashes down? Like, what do we do then? Like, do we live with that regret of what it is we didn't do when we could have? And, you know, for the longest time, there's a great company called 8th Generation, which, you know, they do wool blankets. They help a lot of Native artists, but they have a design contest every year. And I've always wanted to enter, but I see the artists that enter and I see how amazing they are. And I would think, yeah, right. Like, I'm not even close. Like, what are my stick figures? You know, just kind of like talking myself out of it. And I never did it. You know, every year. And because of, you know, just going through what we were going through, I think it made me a little bit braver to try and do things that I normally wouldn't do. Just to say I did it, just to say I tried, you know, and not necessarily for me, but to do what my mom could no longer do. And so, you know, I got brave one night, and I was missing my mom so much. And I was looking at this contest, and I submitted, and I was cracking up because while I was submitting, I was doing this. Like, I was crying. And because they ask you questions, like, why are you entering? You know, like, give us your artist statement. And so, like, I was emotional, and I hit enter. And then I was like, oh, crap. Like, there's no turning back now. They're going to see this. And, you know, I didn't really do it to win, you know, or to think I had a chance. I just thought, I need to do this to say I did it so that, you know, if tomorrow, you know, that's it for me. At least I can say that's one last regret that I had. That's one last thing that I wanted to do and didn't do it. Like, I did it. And so I was kind of like, okay, a little relieved. And I forgot about it. Like I was like, okay, I mean, I didn't think that I was going to be a finalist or anything like that. So I kind of forgot. And then I got an email that said, like, you're one of the finalists. And they started sharing my artwork on their Facebook page. And, saying, okay, this is Johnnie Jae. This is her artwork. And I was kind of like, oh, that's really cool, But then I also saw the other artist. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. But, like, dang, do they got to show me next to her? Like, why? But I kind of like was just kind of enjoying that and being able to see like people enjoy some of the art that I did. One of the submissions that I did was something that means a lot to me as somebody who is disabled. But I started doing this little series for a friend of mine who runs a great organization called Crushing Colonialism. And she was having a disability event. And so like I designed this image for her, and it was one of the submissions because it meant a lot to have that disabled representation. We talk about Native representation, but there's a lot of Natives who still aren't represented, and disabled Natives are part of that group. And so I created a hoop dancer in a wheelchair. And that's one of the images that I submitted, and it was the image that really resonated with 8th generation and also with people just seeing it because we don't see that anywhere. And to me, it didn't seem like that great. And I was thinking like, oh man, do they still have to show it next to that? Because I mean, it's incredible artists enter this. And, I was just enjoying the little moment of being one of the finalists and contestants. And then a couple of months passed and they hit me up and they were like, okay, you're one of 3 finalists. And I was like, oh, dang. Like, what the heck? I was like, okay. And I started thinking like, oh, like maybe I am an artist. Like maybe I do have a skill here. Like maybe this is part of who I am as well. Because I never really thought of myself as an artist or anything. Like my creativity is in writing, it's in speaking, and it's in creating like workshops like Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse Red Style, which you guys missed. But it was something that opened possibilities for me because I was like, oh, even if I don't win, like I could do this. Like I can express myself through my art and it resonates with people, like not just me. Like it could, maybe I could communicate in some way with like what it is I'm feeling. So I started doing more art and being more open about that art and that it's art. Because here's the other thing that I kind of skipped over in just trying to get through without breaking down in tears, is I also do t-shirt designs. And that's where I first started kind of sharing like my art. And I still didn't consider it art because honestly, like my first t-shirt design came after me being sick for a while and getting just a mountain of medical debt and just being kind of like, smart aleck native. I created a shirt that said, I helped the brown ball of fury live. And all I got was this lousy shirt. And surprisingly, people bought it. Like I did it as just kind of like a joke thing. But then people started asking like, oh, do you do more designs? And I was like, no. But I started doing more designs and putting them up. And, with pandemic hit, because I'm immunocompromised, I have lupus, we couldn't work. My partner couldn't work. So selling T-shirts became how we were paying our bills throughout the pandemic. But I never considered it art. I never considered it my art. I just thought it was, something I was doing to live, selling T-shirts, and people were buying them like, yay, but I didn't really connect the art part until after I started doing this contest. And I was like, oh, like, because I submitted some of my tea designs. And I was like, oh, like, this is art. Like, this isn't just a T-shirt. Like, this is actually art. And this is a part of, like, my own creative process, which for some reason, I still have no idea why I was so disconnected from that. Like, as that, those designs coming from me. But, I was a finalist. And the two artists that were finalists with me, I went to go look at their art, and they are so amazing. But I also started looking at their social media following, and they had 200,000 followers, like on Instagram. They had 100,000 here, and I was like, dang. Because on my Instagram, I have like 3,000. And, on Twitter, it's a little bit better because I'm a talker and a writer. I do well on Twitter. So, and it's still small. I have like 21,000 followers on Twitter. It's small. But I was looking at theirs like, dang. And they have TikTok, and my TikTok's really awkward. So, I was like, okay, this is where the road ends for me. I was like, but I'm cool with it. And, I was still promoting the links. I was saying, hey, vote for me, but mainly because I thought if I could help promote those artists, if any one of us wins, like that's a win for Indian country. That's a win for Native women who are artists because we are all women. And so like I was promoting, and, like the voting period ended and didn't think nothing of it. And then I get an email, and they're like, hey, Johnny, we really want to talk to you. Can you meet us at this time? And I was like, sure. And they sent me a Zoom link. And I got on the meeting, and they told me I won. And so the category that I was in was the People's Choice. And they had two other categories. They had the Veterans category, and they had an Elders category. And they picked the winners for those. It wasn't open for voting. So they picked based on merit of, the artistry. And so with People's Choice, it was left to the people to vote. And so I was shocked because, I had a small social media following, but for whatever reason, my art resonated with people, and they voted. And, I won. Somebody who's never considered herself an artist. And so I got to design a blanket for 8th Generation, which is hopefully going to be coming out soon. And I'd love to tell you guys about it and share it, but NDA. But I will say about my design is that it was an opportunity for me to show my gratitude for my tribes, but also to honor my mom and my uncle, who we lost during COVID. But it also opened up other opportunities to collaborate with 8th Generation, because during Pride Month, I was able to design a blanket for them for Pride. And there are only 2 in existence. I have one of them, and a lucky winner of their giveaway has another. And it was really amazing to see that, because when I got that blanket, it's not the one I designed for the contest, but when I got that blanket, and it had my name tag at the bottom with my little logo, and it had my name, like artist, it had my tribes, and I was looking at that like, holy moly, like I actually did this, like this is something that I can have, that my nieces can have, my nephews, when I'm gone, and be like, this was our auntie. This is what she did. Like they have something, a part of the legacy. And, that really got me thinking about what we do as Native people. Like we carry legacy within us from our ancestors, even when they're not here anymore. We carry all the memories. We carry everything that they taught us. We carry that with us, and we pass it, down to our nieces and nephews, down to our sons, our daughters, and it just keeps going. And, it was an amazing realization, because I was like, oh, like I always talk about like empowerment, and I talk about, like we're never just one thing. Like we wear many different hats. We have so much potential. We just have to be brave enough to try, and to have people support us and invest in that potential. But I never really understood that or believed it for myself until I saw that blanket in person. And, it just was like, oh, like, holy crap. That kind of means that everything I've done previous to this, too, is also going to be there when I'm gone. And it was also like another oh no moment, because, we all do good things, but we also do bad things. And so, like, how do we reconcile with all that? How do we deal with our trauma? How do we deal with the wrongs that we do? Like, how do we make that right? How do we live a life that is full, and where we're living up to our full potential, even while we're grieving, while we're hurting, while we're not necessarily, I guess you would say, well enough to actually live up to our full potential? Because life is going to throw, a lot of roadblocks in your way as you go through it. You know, it's never going to turn out the way that you think. You can plan your path as best possible. You can work as hard as you want. But life is going to find a way to throw challenges in there. And sometimes you're going to have to adjust and shift. And you may end up doing things that you never imagined yourself doing, or working in a field that you never imagined yourself in, that you never thought you were interested in. And that was very true for me because, you know, before I started doing the geek thing, I was doing what I had to pay the bills. You know, I started at McDonald's. I worked at Sonic's, which, by the way, is still the highest paying job I've ever had. And that was because of tips. You know, at where we worked, they paid minimum wage plus your tips. So, you know, and it was a very heavy area. So Sonic, you know, made me rich for a little bit. But then I got into graphic design, web design, and I got into corporate management. And, you know, and that's what I was doing until I got sick with lupus. And, you know, with lupus, I've had lupus since I was 9. And so, you know, part of the reason that my job seems so different is because I had to adjust to what I could do at the time because of my health. And I never get too comfortable doing one thing because I'm always aware that at any given time, you know, I could have a bad lupus flare, or it could change, you know, how I have to interact with the world. It could change my mobility at any given time. So, like, I'm always aware that, you know, like, don't get too comfortable. Always be looking at different opportunities because, you know, it may be what you have to do at the time. So, you know, I did corporate management, and I actually kind of liked it. I liked being bossy and telling people what to do. It's like not my proudest moment, but one of my favorite things to say is that I did fire one person that we hired after 1 hour. And I know that sounds kind of, you know, mean, but let me tell you, on her, like, we did a lot of computer work, and her resume was perfect. When she did the interview, she was perfect. Her first day in, you know, she was like, Johnny, she's like, when you have a moment, can you come help me? My computer's not working. And I was like, yeah, sure. So, you know, I got a free minute. I went over and I was like, what's the problem? She's like, it won't turn on. And I'm like, oh, I was like, okay. So, like, I'm crawling around and I'm looking behind the computer, making sure everything's plugged in. I'm like, it's good. Show me how you're turning it on. And she's like, okay. And she reaches up and she turns the monitor on, but not the computer. And so, like, I was like, huh? You know, like, I was like, oh, well, you have to turn the tower on. And she's like, what's the tower? And I was like, what? And so, like, I turned it on for her. And, you know, we had a guide, like a visual guide that shows you how to log on, everything. And she didn't know how to do any of it. Like, and so, like, I started asking her questions, and she's like, well, I lied on my resume. She's like, you know, I just copied it. She goes, because I knew you had to know how to use a computer, but I thought I would just pick it up as I went. And I was like, oh, and I was like, normally I'd be cool with that, but, you know, we needed help at the time. And I was like, dang it, you know, like, and we had to let her go. But I felt bad about it. But also, you know, it was kind of funny because, like, 1 hour, you know, I think that's got to be a record somewhere. Like, you had a job and you only lasted an hour. But I loved corporate management. You know, it was structured. It was, you know, I knew what to expect. And I got comfortable there. And then, of course, I started getting sick and I didn't realize why. And it was because they changed the lighting in the office building to fluorescent lightings. I'm photosensitive because I have lupus. And so, like, it was triggering lupus flares. And I was like, holy crap, like, you know, like, and I had to leave that job. And then, of course, I got really sick. And I actually ended up having to move back to Oklahoma from New Mexico so that I could get the care that I needed. And when I got to Oklahoma, because I couldn't work, I started doing graphic design and web design again. And I was helping to promote different bands. And, you know, and I did that for the longest time until I saw an ad for Native Max magazine, and they were looking for writers. And I was like, cool. I was like, I always wanted to be a writer. So I sent in my application and I started writing for Native Max magazine. And when I got to Native Max magazine, you know, it opened up a whole new world of, like, cool natives doing cool native stuff. And seeing that, you know, like, just realizing that, oh, Native people have been working on all these issues we've been facing, but they don't necessarily get the shine that they need. And it really opened up a whole new world for me. So like while I'm looking at this art and while I'm trying to figure out like, okay, what does this mean for me? You know, I'm going back and looking at all the things I did before, trying to figure out like, what does this all mean? What do I do now? And winning that contest just kind of realized like, oh, you know, I don't have to choose just one thing. Like there isn't just one thing that defines me or that is going to help me heal or to navigate my way in this world. You know, we're going to find it in very different ways, very different paths. And for me, it was in being creative, in creating. And then you start really looking at Native communities. And that's what we're doing. We're always creating. We're always grieving, but at the same time, we're always creating something. You know, we're doing art, we're doing writing, you know, we're doing something all the time, just creating opportunities for ourselves, even when they don't exist for us. Like we go out and we make those opportunities ourselves. You know, we are finding natives who are gaining like positions at Vogue because of their beadwork. Like there was a great article that was talking about natives who are doing not traditional beadwork, but geeky beadwork. Like they were talking about the artists who did the pickles and the microphone for reservation dogs. And, you know, we're starting to see those opportunities because, you know, it's healing and, you know, trauma. Like it's part of like what we do, but it's going to be different for all of us. And, you know, I don't think we're taught how to deal with that or like what to do. Like we're told we have to choose, like, are we going to be traditional? Are we going to be contemporary natives? Are we going to be this or that? We always are pressured to choose just one path. And for natives, that's really not who we are. Like time has never been linear for us to begin with. Like there's not a linear path to success. But yet, if you look at when you go to school, you're told you go to elementary, you go to middle school, you go to high school, then you go to college, then you get a job, then you get married. Like it's a very linear path. But for natives, it's very different because we have all of these different obstacles that come our way. So sometimes, you know, that path is a little different from us. Sometimes it's elementary, sometimes it's middle school, and then it's job. And then you go back to and you finish high school later because, you know, maybe you had to take care of your parents or your grandparents and you had to get a job. You know, sometimes you may have gotten pregnant and you have a kid and you become a parent before you even graduate high school or go to college, but you do those things later. Like it doesn't mean that you can't do those things anymore. It just means that you have to take a different path to get there. And that's something that we're not told. And it's the same with healing and it's the same with navigating our trauma. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and we're going to have to find very different ways that work for us to do that. Sometimes we're going to find that way in culture. Sometimes we're going to find it in Star Wars, which for me, when I kind of look at my survival, when I was going through my like depression when I was younger, when I was like 15, that was the first time that, you know, I attempted to take my own life. Where I found healing was within Star Wars fandom. Because it was the one place where no one felt like they were judging me. You know, I could go and, you know, I could talk about Star Wars and there were so many different people, so many different ages that it didn't matter. Like if you started talking about like what you were going through in your life, like they didn't judge because a lot of them had been there too. Like they, you know, they understood what it was like to be kind of like a misfit or an outcast. And so, you know, I love Star Wars, and a lot of that is because of that. Like, that's where I found healing when I was younger. It's where I found belonging. And then, of course, you know, part of that healing was my culture. It was my great-grandmother telling me that, you know, like people think that we lived in a utopia, that there wasn't suicide or depression in our communities before colonization, that there was. But we just had a different way of looking at it and of caring for people. Like we took care of that person as a community and we knew when to, you know, get close. We knew when to back off. Like we knew how to care for them and we did it as a community. So that's why suicide was so rare, but it did happen. And her telling me this normalized it, you know, like, oh, okay, I'm not an outcast. Like it does, you know, because I did this, because I'm dealing with this, it doesn't diminish my nativeness. Like it doesn't diminish like who I am as a person. And, you know, it allowed me some freedom to just kind of start accepting myself and reconciling with what I was going through. And, and I really didn't get the help that I needed until I was in my early 20s. But once I did, it opened up a whole new world of like, oh, like, okay, cool. Like, and I learned how to take care of myself, how to, keep myself from slipping back into that depression as deep as I did when I was younger. And I still struggle with it. And, we tend to think of it as something that's one day, it's going to snap and it's not going to be there anymore. But for me, it's a lifelong struggle, and it's something that, I'm going to deal with for the rest of my life, and I have to be aware of that and know how to deal with it. And sometimes I wish it was like in the movies when, you see somebody, okay, I'm a One Tree Hill fan. So, there's a part where one of the characters, she loses her mom, and she goes into depression. And, she's angry, she's, setting things on fire, and, like, she's not dealing with it well, and she can't talk to anybody about it. Like, she puts on a strong front, like, I'm okay, but she's not. And, she's out walking, and she sees an owl, and her sister were talking about, what they imagined their mom would come back as. And they said an owl, and she sees the owl, and she gets all happy and she runs, and that's the end of her depression story. Like, she's all good, she's happy, life is great again afterwards. And I wish that was the movies, but it's a struggle, and I'm finding that with grief. And with art, for me, it's a way we heal because we're always creating. And I think that's how Natives have learned to cope with everything that we've lost. In place of that loss, we create something new. We create something else to carry on those memories. And so today, what we're going to do is we are going to create our own tree of life. And the significance of this is that almost every culture around the world has some kind of tale about a tree of life. And sometimes it's not a tree, sometimes it's a different kind of root system. For a lot of Native cultures, you look at our creation stories. We have a lot of Natives where their creation stories is they came from the earth. They came from a root system. And with the tree of life, it's supposed to signify a source that is connected to the underground, but also to heaven. And, and that's with, when you look at Native cultures, in our clan systems, it's the same way. We have clans that are rooted in the earth, like we have Elk Clan, we have Bear Clan, but then we also have Eagle Clan and Owl Clan, we have Wind clans, and, we have a wide variety of clans, but it's all connected, and it all connects us to the earth that we live in, to the earth, to the sky, to our water, to the wind. It shows that we're all connected. And, and again, what we're going to do is create this tree of life. And I know it's fall, so, the leaves are starting to fall. The earth is starting to go to sleep until the spring. And that's when a lot of people start dealing with depression. When it's sunny, when everything is green and it's bright and it's hot and there's things to do, it's so much easier to be distracted and to feel good, and to have fun. But now it's getting fall, you guys are back in school, and it's like, oh, dang, you got to wake up early every day, maybe get a little break here or there. But, it gets harder, like, once you hit fall. You have more time, things quiet down. You have more time to think and be with yourself. And sometimes that's a really dangerous place to be because, sometimes our minds, we get trapped in them. We start thinking about all the negative things. We start thinking about all the things we should have done or all our regrets. And sometimes we just get lost in that in the fall because, we're just so in our own heads and everything is quiet. And there's no distraction. There's nothing bright and shiny to kind of pull us out of that so easily, So I figured today we would kind of, create something that is going to last through the winter. And also in a way for us to kind of like share our own legacies or our own memories. So what we're going to do today is I do have some leaves that we're going to add to the tree. So what I want you to do with the leaves is I want you to think about positive affirmations. Like if you were hurting, if you're grieving, what do you need? And just write it down on the leaf. If you want to pay tribute to someone that you've lost to honor their memory, write their name down. And if you don't know, what to say or what you need or what you feel, just do a design. And, we're going to add all these leaves to the tree, and the museum's going to keep the tree so that, people who can see, like, this is, who was here at the time, and this is what they were feeling. Like, this is what they were creating. This is, in a way, how they were choosing to heal that day. And so, I'm going to hand out these little leaves, and it's kind of cool. I don't know. It kind of took me back to my childhood. Like when you used to color your rainbow and then go over it with black crayon and scratch. So, it's going to bring some nostalgia back for some of us. But, just take some time and just kind of think about, like, what it is you need to heal. Positive affirmations, like, what do you want someone to tell you that's going to make you feel good? What do you need? And if you want to memorialize somebody, just write their name down and even just, again, just do a design. Just let yourself kind of be free to create something. Because, regardless of what you're going through or whether or not you realize it, like, just that act of creating something, of doing a design, it kind of allows your mind to relax, to go somewhere else, to think about something that it taps into a part of you that isn't necessarily open yet. It kind of forces you to go there. And so, I think that's one of the reasons I love this activity so much, because, there's just so much healing in art. That's why we have art therapy. And, just you can express yourself. You can say things that you don't necessarily have the words for, but you can say it in what you draw and what you create. And so I'm going to hand out the leaves now, but also I want to call out that shirt because my cousin designed that Indigenous Empower shirt. So that's awesome. All right. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hand these out. And okay, I'll start over here. All right. And, while you're finishing up, when you're done, you could just bring them and set them up at the floor here. Yeah, I really enjoy, like, talking with people about these things. I think it's important that we talk about, like, healing, that, it's not necessarily something that is always going to be, like, look a certain way. And I think for a lot of things, we tend to think of healing. We tend to think of, like, how we experience trauma in a very specific way. And it doesn't always look like that. For me, a lot of people, like even my therapist, for the longest time would make a joke that I was the happiest depressed person that he's ever met, because I would always go in and, we also had to get over, like, my communication style, because for me, I do humor. So going into therapy for me was like a stand-up comedy routine. Like, I felt like I was trying to entertain him. And always trying to make things funny or upbeat. And sometimes I would just rant about, whatever episode of TV show I was watching. And it took him a while to kind of, and for me to even realize, like, that was how I was coping. Like, when I'm uncomfortable, I just fall back on humor, or, I fall back on talking about, like, the things that I love, which is, for the most part, TV and geeky things. Like, let me tell you, I went on a 2-session rant with him about Chucky, the TV series, because the episodes were just resonating with me at the time, and I didn't want to say what it was I was actually feeling, but I could express it through Chucky, So healing, it's never going to look just a certain way, and you're not going to deal with trauma in a certain way or a linear way. Like, it's going to be, kind of all over the place. Some days you're going to have good days. Some days you're going to have bad days. And with grief, it's kind of crazy, because some days you're going to feel like, all right, like, I've made peace with this. I'm good. But then the next day, you might watch a TV show or hear a song on the radio, and it brings it all back again. And you're grieving exactly the same as you were when you first found out you lost that person. And so, like, it's always going to be very different a day to day. And, like, for a lot of natives, it's 1 year mourning period, and we're supposed to, like, let it go, and there's a lot of healing. There's a lot of logic in that. But at the same time, our human experience is very different. It's not always going to be just 1 year, that it takes for us to heal enough to be okay. Sometimes it's going to take 2. Sometimes it's going to take 3. And, and what I'm finding, when my mom lost her parents, she used to talk about how it was hard, like 10 years after she lost them. And I never really understood like what that meant or why, but now I do. And I realized like, oh, it's different. Like it's a different kind of loss. And so grief, it's always going to be unexpected in the way that it comes to you and the way that you deal with it. Some losses, like we've just become so used to that loss that sometimes it's a little easier. Like we find a way to like shut it down, but then there's some relationships, maybe that closeness that we have to that person, it's a lot harder to close off those walls. And so it's a lot harder to deal with that grief and to kind of mourn and let go. And so, I hope that when you're, feeling like you're struggling or that you're hurting and you're trying to figure out like how to communicate that you realize like you can do that in a lot of different ways. You don't have to talk about it. You can draw it. You can create music, or, you can pour that emotion into something that you love, and just let that be your communication. Let that be the vehicle that carries that grief for you and that hurt, and a way for you to kind of let it go. So, don't think that it has to be one way, that you have to talk about it if you're not ready to talk about it, or that you have to, let go if you're not ready to let go. It's going to be different, and you come to that understanding in your own time. And so I think that's really important because, we're just so pushed to believe that you got to do things on a time schedule, and, life's not like that. And our human experience isn't like that. And the one thing that we should always remember, too, is that we are all connected to one another in a very wide variety of ways. As Native people, we know you're seeing someone and you're talking to them and you're like, oh, man, you're my cousin, like, uh-oh. It's like I got to behave because I just found out this one's my grandma. Like we're connected in ways that we don't always know. And I think it's important to realize that because as human beings, we're all connected. And in doing this tree of life, one of the things that it also signifies is how all of creation is connected together through this almost like a sacred root system, a sacred kinship. And we all have that with each other. And so, I think that it's important for us, like when we're grieving and when we're trying to heal, to realize that the next person right next to you may be going through the same thing. And, in sharing that healing with each other, like you can kind of help each other kind of get through it. And as community, we come together and we take care of each other. And that's something that has been so lost. And Paulette Blanchard said it yesterday, that the one thing that she feels is missing in this world is caring. And we've forgotten how to care for one another. And so in doing this tree of life, it's hopefully going to be like a reminder, that we are all connected and that we have a responsibility to take care of one another, to make sure that we all have what we need in order to survive, in order to thrive. And so I'm going to leave you with that today. And thank you all for being here. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, I'm always around. But thank you all for being here.